Hey guys, what's going on? It's Shatterpoint back with another video, and in this one we're going to be talking about Batman the Animated Series episode Heart of Ice. Batman the Animated Series was the series that was done in 1992 and still stands as one of the best interpretations of the character that has ever been seen. So our story starts with Mr. Freeze holding a snow globe that he made with a model of his wife Nora inside of it. Mr. Freeze is talking about how the monster that took Nora away from him will soon learn that revenge is a dish best served cold. The scene then goes to the news, where Summer Gleason is the reporter. She says it's the hottest August in Gotham's records, yet there are a number of cult-related crimes. The most recent crime was a crime at GothCorp, where the assailant was said to be wielding a freezing gun. She says that the motive of the assailant is unclear, but they did get an interview with the CEO of GothCorp, Ferris Boyle. The scene then shows the interview with Ferris Boyle, where he says that he doesn't know what the assailant has against GothCorp, but GothCorp has always thought of themselves as the people company. If this man has a problem, we're willing to listen. The scene then goes to the Batcave, where Batman is at the Batcomputer analyzing what was stolen at GothCorp. Alfred walks up to Batman and says, "Taking up video games, sir." Batman says, "The items stolen from GothCorp don't look like much on their own, but combined they make a weapon capable of generating intense cold. There's still one part missing though, and only one GothCorp plant makes it." The scene then goes to that GothCorp plant where we see a truck driving towards the main gates. The truck smashes through the main gates and drives into the facility. We then see the Batmobile show up and follow the truck into the facility. A thug looks in the rearview mirror and sees Batman gaining on them, and he says, "He's coming." Mr. Freeze, who is in the truck as well, says to the thug, "Keep your mind on your business, I'll deal with him." Mr. Freeze then shoots the road with his freeze gun. The Batmobile slips on the layer of ice on the road and crashes. With Batman now crashed, Freeze and his thugs move deeper into the facility and then rob it of canisters. Batman gets out of the Batmobile and follows them on foot. After they've loaded all of the canisters on their truck, Batman shows up. He beats up the thugs and then throws a batarang at Freeze. Mr. Freeze shoots his freeze gun at the batarang and the batarang shatters at his feet. He then says to Batman, "This is a personal vendetta, it does not concern you." Batman says, "It's my concern now," and then Mr. Freeze says, "Since you align yourself with my enemies, you leave me no choice." Freeze shoots his gun at Batman and Batman grapples away, and the blast accidentally hits one of Freeze's thugs and his legs are frozen. Freeze continues to shoot his gun at Batman and does eventually freeze him. Freeze then says to his other thugs about the thug that got his legs frozen, "Leave him, he should have been more careful, and now he's paying the price for it." The thugs say, "But he's one of us." Freeze says, "Then perhaps you'd like to join him in his fate." Freeze aims his gun at them, but then they shake their head no and they begin to leave with Freeze. The thug with his legs frozen begs them not to leave. But Freeze and his thugs drive away in the van, and Batman breaks free of the ice he was trapped in. Batman then takes the thug back to the Batcave to thaw out his legs. Alfred approaches and says, "You show a lot of compassion for a man that surely would have left you to die if he were in your place." Batman then starts sniffing, and Alfred says, "With all the compartments on your belt, you'd think there'd be one for tissues," and then he offers Batman a tissue. Batman blows his nose, and then the thug's legs are thawed out. Batman says the chemical bath worked, and then Batman sneezes. Alfred says, "You could use a hot bath yourself." Batman says, "I can't worry about a cold right now. Bruce Wayne has a meeting with Ferris Boyle." The scene then goes to GothCorp, specifically Ferris Boyle's office, where we see Bruce Wayne walk in and then Ferris Boyle greets him, saying, "It's been forever, how you been, Bruce?" Bruce then starts coughing and says to Boyle, "I get around." "What is this about someone causing trouble for GothCorp?" Boyle says, "Beats me, some fruitcake has it out for me and my company." Bruce says, "Maybe it's an investor that lost money," and then continues coughing. "Or an ex-employee." Boyle says, "There's only one man that would hate GothCorp that much, if he were still alive." Bruce says, "Who?" And Boyle says, "One of our scientists, an obsessed wacko. He was caught using company materials for personal reasons. I had to send my security in to confront him, and there was a fight, an explosion, we lost him." Bruce says, well, what was he doing? And then Boyle says, he was wasting company money, my money. When the wage slaves start acting like they own the place, it's time to pull the plug. The secretary of Gothcorp then calls Boyle and says the humanitarian committee is here. Boyle then explains to Bruce that he's holding a ceremony for the humanitarian award. And guess who's winning it? And Bruce says, I feel ill. I mean my cold. I've gotta go. Congratulations on your award. I'm sure you earned it. And then Bruce leaves. The scene then goes to a TV where the ceremony is on. Summer Gleason is interviewing Ferris Boyle, and Boyle says that the attacks on Gothcorp have in no way affected his commitment to the community. Mr. Freeze then shoots the TV with his freeze gun. We then see Freeze sitting in front of the TV, and he says, compassion, charity, where were those pretty words when she needed them? We then see Freeze holding the snow globe that he made with the model of his wife inside of it. We then see deeper in Freeze's hideout Freeze's thugs working on the weapon. Freeze then walks in the room and says to his thugs, the cannon must be completed tonight. I have my own warm wishes that I want to bestow on Mr. Boyle. The scene then goes to the Batcave, where Batman is at the Bat computer analyzing old newspaper headlines. Alfred then walks up to Batman, and Batman says, when Boyle mentions the explosion, I remembered this headline from last year. Alfred says to Batman, does it say what caused the accident? Batman says no, but I'm sure that's the reason for the cover-up. I won't know for sure though until I check Gothcorp's classified files. Batman then starts coughing, and Alfred says if you're planning on sneaking around a crowded office building, you'll need this. Alfred then hands Batman a container. Batman looks at it and says, knockout gas? Alfred says no, chicken soup, the only way to fight a cold. The scene then goes to the humanitarian ceremony where we focus in on the security room. We then see Bruce Wayne disguised as a security guard. He approaches the real security guard on duty. Bruce then says to the security guard, Boyle wants us to switch. Go enjoy the party. The security guard then leaves, and then Bruce dresses up as Batman, and then he enters the file room. Batman then pulls the file on Victor Freeze, and inside the file is a recording, and Batman plays it. The video explains that Victor Freeze's wife, Nora, was sick with a fatal disease. So Victor froze her in a cryo chamber until he could find a cure. Boyle then came into the room and said, get away from that equipment, shut all of this down. Victor says, but wait a minute, this is my experiment. Boyle says, your unauthorized experiment. I'm already $3 million in debt because of you. Freeze says, you can't interrupt the process now, this is her only chance. Boyle then yells at Freeze and says this is my equipment and I have the right to use it however I see fit. Freeze grabs the gun of the security guard that was with Boyle and he aims it at Boyle and says, get away from her, you murderer. Boyle then says to Freeze, Victor, I lost my temper, it doesn't have to come to this. And then Victor puts the gun down and then Boyle kicks Freeze. Freeze stumbles back into toxic chemicals on his work desk. Boyle and the security guard with him leave the room and then Victor turns into Mr. Freeze. The video then cuts out and Batman says to himself, my God. We then see Freeze standing behind Batman and Freeze says, yes, it would move me to tears if I still had any to shed. Freeze then shoots Batman with his freeze gun, and the scene goes to Freeze's hideout, where Batman wakes up with his feet frozen to the ceiling. We see Freeze standing nearby, and he says to Batman, the snow is beautiful, don't you think? Clean, uncompromising? Batman says, and cold. Freeze says, like the swift hand of vengeance, and Batman says, I saw what happens to your wife, I'm sorry. Freeze says, I am beyond emotion, they've been frozen dead in me. Batman then says to Freeze, that suit you wear, it's a result of the coolant? And Mr. Freeze says, a detective to the last. I can't survive out of a sub-zero temperature, and tonight I will get my revenge on the man that ruined my life, our lives. Batman says, even if you have to kill everybody in the building to do it? Freeze then says, think of it, Batman, walking on a summer's day without being able to feel the hot wind on your face, or without being able to feel a warm hand in yours. Oh yes, I would kill for that. Freeze then walks away from Batman and says to his thugs, let's go. With Freeze and his thugs now gone, Batman breaks free from the ceiling of Freeze's lair. The scene then goes to the humanitarian ceremony at Gothcorp. Freeze and his thugs then pull up in a truck with the Freeze weapon attached to the back of the truck. Freeze says, "Fire," and then Freeze's thugs fire the ice weapon at Gothcorp. Freeze says, "Continue to fire, let the evil that walks inside be cleansed by pure, unforgiving ice." The scene then goes to inside Gothcorp, where Ferris Boyle is about to receive his humanitarian award. Just before he receives it though, the window breaks open and snow floods the room. The scene then goes back to Freeze's truck, where Batman is there beating up Freeze's thugs. Freeze escapes from the truck and then makes his way to the same room in Gothcorp where Ferris Boyle is. Freeze confronts Boyle and says, "The cold eyes of vengeance are on you." Boyle says, "Who are you?" And then Freeze says, "Surely you remember your old colleague, Victor Freeze." He then freezes Boyle up to the waist, and Boyle says, "Please, I beg you." Mr. Freeze says, "You beg? In my nightmares I see my Nora behind the glass begging to me with frozen eyes. How I've longed to see that look on you." Batman throws a batarang at Mr. Freeze, knocking his freeze gun to the floor, and then Batman and Mr. Freeze fight. During the fight, Mr. Freeze says to Batman that his suit triples his strength. They continue to fight, and then at the end of the fight, Batman smashes the chicken soup that Alfred gave him over Freeze's helmet. Freeze's helmet cracks and shatters. Summer Gleason then approaches Batman and says, "What was that stuff?" And Batman says, "The only way to fight a cold." Freeze then says, "I will have vengeance," and then Batman says, "No, justice." Batman then says to everybody in the room that a year ago Ferris Boyle interrupted an experiment, and that interrupting the experiment destroyed 2 lives. Batman then hands the video that he found in Victor's file to Summer Gleason. Batman then approaches Boyle and says, "Good night, humanitarian." The scene then goes to Arkham Asylum, where we see Victor Freeze in his cell. He's holding the snow globe that he made with the model of Nora inside of it. Victor is saying, "I failed you, Nora. I can only beg for your forgiveness and pray that you hear me, somehow, someplace where a warm hand waits for mine." We then see Batman looking in the window of Victor's cell from a building nearby. And that brings this story to an end. If you enjoyed, please leave a like, share, and subscribe, and when you do, make sure you hit the bell so you get notified whenever I do drop a video, and I will see you guys in the next one.